The bride who refused to break. She stood there in white silk while 300 people watched her dream collapse. The church doors never opened. The groom never came. Whispers turned to laughter, pity turned to scorn, and Lydia Vale became the joke that London society would feast on for years. But here's what they didn't expect. She didn't cry. She didn't faint. She walked out of that church with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and that single act of defiance would set her on a path no one saw coming. Stay until the end to see how she conquers them all. Drop a comment with your city below. Let's see where you're watching from. And if you believe broken people can rebuild themselves stronger, hit that like button right now. The morning started with rain, not the gentle kind that taps politely on windows. This was the cold, ruthless sort that hammered the cobblestones and turned London's streets into rivers of mud and misery. Inside St. Margaret's Church, though, everything gleamed. Candles flickered in perfect rows. White roses dripped from every archway. The pews were packed with the cream of society, dressed in their finest, whispering behind gloved hands. And at the altar, Lydia Vale waited. Her dress was a masterpiece, ivory silk that caught the light, lace sleeves that brushed her wrists, a train that pooled behind her like spilled moonlight. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a veil so delicate it seemed woven from spider silk. She'd been dressed since dawn, her mother fussing over every detail, her younger sister Emma hovering nearby with wide, anxious eyes. "You look like a princess," Emma had whispered. Lydia had smiled. "I feel like I'm about to be sick." "That's normal," her mother said briskly, adjusting the veil for the 100th time. "Every bride feels this way." But this wasn't normal nervousness. This was something deeper, colder, a knot of dread that had been tightening in Lydia's chest for weeks. She'd tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was just wedding jitters, just the natural fear of stepping into a new life. She'd tried to believe in Thomas Harrington. They'd met at a garden party in June. He was handsome in that easy, careless way some men are. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He'd courted her with flowers and poetry, with long walks through Hyde Park and whispered promises under summer stars. "I'll make you happy," he'd said the night he proposed. "I swear it, Lydia, you'll never regret choosing me." She'd wanted so badly to believe him. Now, standing at the altar with the organ playing softly behind her and 300 pairs of eyes boring into her back, Lydia wondered if she'd been a fool. The vicar stood beside her, his face carefully neutral. He was a thin man with kind eyes and a voice like warm honey, and he'd performed dozens of weddings in this church. But even he seemed uneasy now, glancing toward the doors every few seconds. "He'll be here," Lydia murmured, more to herself than to him. The vicar nodded. "Of course." But the minutes stretched. The organ music swelled and faded and swelled again, the same melody looping endlessly. The guests shifted in their seats. The whispers grew louder. Lydia's father stood beside her, his arm stiff beneath her hand. Richard Vale was a stern man, a merchant who'd built his fortune through grit and calculation. He didn't believe in love matches. He believed in alliances, in strategic partnerships that elevated the family name. Thomas Harrington had seemed like a perfect choice, the second son of a viscount, well-connected, charming, respectable. "He's late," her father said quietly. "I can see that." "This is unacceptable." Lydia said nothing. Her throat felt too tight for words. Behind her, the whispers sharpened into something uglier. She could hear snatches of conversation now, words floating over the pews like poison. "Always knew he was unreliable." Poor girl, standing there like a fool, probably realized what he was getting into. Her mother appeared at her side, her face pale. "Lydia, perhaps we should—" "No." Lydia's voice came out harder than she intended. "We wait." So they waited. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 30. The organ player gave up trying to fill the silence and let his hands fall silent. The guests weren't even pretending to be polite anymore. They were staring openly now, some with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. Lady Ashford, a woman who'd never forgiven Lydia for once refusing her son's clumsy advances, leaned toward her neighbor and said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "I suppose some women simply aren't meant to be wives." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, exactly, but something closer to her pride. She'd stood here for nearly an hour in front of everyone who mattered in London society, and Thomas Harrington had made her a spectacle. "That's enough," her father said quietly. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. "We're leaving." "No." "Lydia," I said no. She turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him step back. "I will not slink out of here like a wounded animal. I will not give them that satisfaction." Her mother reached for her arm. "Darling, please, let go of me." The sharpness in her tone made her mother flinch. Lydia immediately regretted it, but she didn't apologize. She couldn't. If she softened even a fraction, she'd shatter completely. She turned to face the crowd. 300 people stared back at her. She saw pity in some faces, contempt in others, and worst of all, relief. Relief that this humiliation was happening to her and not to them. Relief that they could go home tonight and tell their families about poor Lydia Vale, jilted at the altar, standing there in her wedding dress like a ghost bride. She wanted to scream. She wanted to set the church on fire and watch it burn. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice ringing clear through the vaulted space. "I apologize for wasting your time." Then she gathered her skirts, turned her back on the altar, and walked. The aisle stretched before her like a gauntlet. Every step felt like walking through fire. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, her hands steady even though they wanted to shake. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked at the same measured pace she'd rehearsed 100 times, imagining this moment would be the happiest of her life. Behind her, the whispers erupted into full conversation. She heard her mother sob, heard her father curse under his breath, heard Lady Ashford say something cruel that made the people around her laugh. She kept walking. The church doors loomed ahead, tall, heavy, carved with saints and sinners. A footman rushed forward to open them, his face carefully blank. Lydia stepped through into the rain. It hit her like a slap, cold and merciless. Within seconds, her veil was plastered to her face, her dress heavy with water. She didn't care. She walked down the stone steps, through the courtyard, past the carriages that should have taken her and Thomas to their new life together. She walked until her feet hurt, until her dress was ruined, until she couldn't hear the church bells anymore. She walked until she found herself standing at the edge of Hyde Park, staring at the place where Thomas had proposed 6 months ago. Only then did she let herself feel it. The humiliation crashed over her in waves, the rage, the grief for a future that had been ripped away before it even began. She pressed her hands to her face and let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "Miss Vale?" She spun around. A young man stood a few feet away, holding an umbrella. He was dressed simply, a clerk or a tradesman, she thought, and he looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure if approaching her had been a terrible mistake. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was so absurd that Lydia almost laughed. "Do I look all right?" "No," he admitted. "You look like you've been through hell." The honesty surprised her. Most people would have offered empty platitudes, would have tried to smooth over the ugliness with polite words. This stranger just stood there in the rain, watching her with something that looked almost like understanding. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing. He hesitated. "I saw you leave the church, thought you might need help." "I don't need anyone's help." "Fair enough." He started to turn away, then paused. "For what it's worth, whoever left you standing there is an idiot." Then he walked away, disappearing into the rain before Lydia could respond. She stood there alone, water streaming down her face, and felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, the rage. But underneath it all, something harder was forming. Thomas Harrington had tried to destroy her. Society would expect her to crumble, to disappear into some quiet corner and live out her days as a cautionary tale. But Lydia Vale had never been good at doing what people expected. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Lydia locked herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Her mother brought trays of food that went untouched. Her father paced the hallways, alternating between rage and helpless worry. Emma sat outside her door and read aloud from novels, trying to fill the silence. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. Her mother brought it up personally, her face drawn. "It's from Thomas." Lydia took it without a word and waited until her mother left before opening it. The handwriting was familiar, the same elegant script that had filled love letters and poetry, that had signed his name at the bottom of the marriage contract. "Lydia, I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing now, but they're all I have to offer. I couldn't go through with it, not because of you. You were perfect, always perfect. But I realized I was marrying you for the wrong reasons. My family's debts, your father's money, the expectations, it all became too much. I was a coward, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I hope someday you can forgive me. T." Lydia read it 3 times, then held it over the candle flame and watched it burn. Forgiveness. He wanted forgiveness. He'd left her standing at the altar in front of 300 people, had turned her into London's favorite joke, had destroyed her reputation and her future. And he wanted forgiveness. The letter curled and blackened, turning to ash. "No," Lydia said softly. She wouldn't forgive him, she wouldn't forget, and she sure as hell wouldn't disappear. By the end of the week, the gossip had spread through every drawing room in London. Lydia Vale, the jilted bride. Poor pathetic Lydia, abandoned at the altar. The invitations that had once flooded their house dried up completely. The families who'd once courted her father's business connections suddenly found excuses to be elsewhere. Her father's face grew grimmer each day. "We'll weather this," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Her mother stopped trying to coax her out of her room and started talking about visiting relatives in the country, somewhere far from London and its cruel whispers. But Lydia had no intention of running. Instead, she started attending her father's business meetings. Richard Vale had built his fortune in shipping and trade, navigating contracts and negotiations with the same ruthless precision he brought to everything else. He'd never involved Lydia in the business before. That was men's work, he'd always said. Women were meant for drawing rooms and social calls, for marriage and motherhood. But now, with his daughter's reputation in ruins and his business connections fraying, he was desperate enough to let her sit in. "Just observe, Westham," he said the first time. "Don't speak unless spoken to." Lydia observed. And she learned. She learned that her father's competitors saw him as old-fashioned, too rigid in his thinking. She learned that several key contracts were on the verge of collapse because he refused to adapt to changing markets. She learned that the business she'd always thought of as unshakable was actually balanced on a knife's edge. And she learned that she was good at this. Numbers made sense to her in a way people never had. She could see patterns in ledgers, could spot opportunities and risks that her father's advisors missed. During one particularly tense negotiation over shipping rates, she leaned forward and quietly suggested an alternative arrangement, one that would give both sides what they needed without either losing face. The room went silent. Her father stared at her. The other men looked uncomfortable, like a dog had suddenly started reciting Shakespeare. But the lead negotiator, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Pemberton, nodded slowly. That might actually work. They hammered out the details. The contract was signed. Her father's business was saved, at least for now. Afterward, Richard Vale pulled her aside. "Where did you learn to do that?" "I listened," Lydia said, "and I thought about what you needed instead of what you wanted." He studied her for a long moment. "You have your mother's face and my mind. Dangerous combination." It wasn't quite a compliment, but coming from him, it was close enough. 6 months passed. Lydia stopped waiting for invitations and started building something else, a life that didn't depend on other people's approval. She threw herself into her father's business with a focus that bordered on obsession. She learned contracts and trade routes, shipping schedules and market fluctuations. She attended meetings that made grown men sweat, and she held her own. The whispers followed her everywhere, at the market, in the park, anywhere society's eyes could find her. But Lydia had learned to wear her scandal like armor. Let them talk, let them laugh. She had work to do. Emma worried. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said one evening, finding Lydia bent over a stack of ledgers at midnight. "I'm fine." "You're not sleeping. You barely eat. Lydia, you're going to make yourself sick." "I said I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Some nights she woke up gasping, dreaming of the church, of Thomas's empty promises, of 300 faces watching her humiliation. Those nights she got up and worked until dawn because work was the only thing that made sense anymore. One afternoon, her mother cornered her in the library. "Lydia, we need to talk." "I'm busy." "You're always busy." Her mother sat down across from her, folding her hands in her lap. "Darling, I know you're hurting, but you can't spend the rest of your life hiding in your father's business." "I'm not hiding, I'm working." "You're running." Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. "You're running from what happened, from your feelings, from what?" Lydia snapped. "From the fact that the man I trusted made me a laughingstock? From the fact that everyone I know either pities me or mocks me? What exactly should I be facing, Mother?" "The future. Your future. Not as your father's assistant, but as yourself." Lydia looked away. "I don't know who that is anymore." "Then figure it out." Her mother reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "But don't let Thomas Harrington steal your whole life. He took enough already." The turning point came on a cold November morning. Lydia was reviewing shipping manifests when her father burst into the office, his face flushed with anger. "That bastard Whitmore is trying to undercut us on the Rotterdam route." Gerald Whitmore was a competitor, wealthy, ruthless, and currently circling her father's business like a shark that smelled blood in the water. "What's his offer?" Lydia asked. Her father named a figure that made her wince. It was low enough to be insulting, high enough to be tempting. "We can't match that," Richard said. "Not without taking a loss." "Then don't match it." "If we don't, we lose the contract, and if we lose that contract, we find another way." Lydia stood, her mind already racing. "Whitmore's undercutting us because he thinks we're weak. He thinks you're too old to fight and I'm too damaged to matter. So we show him he's wrong." Her father raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that?" "We go after his clients. Offer them something he can't. Better terms, faster delivery, personal attention. We make him react to us instead of the other way around." "That's aggressive." "That's business." Richard Vale studied his daughter, and for the first time in months, Lydia saw something like pride in his eyes. "You've changed." "Yes," Lydia said. "I have." They spent the next 2 weeks implementing her plan. It was brutal, exhausting work. Long days of negotiations, late nights crunching numbers, endless meetings with clients who viewed her with skepticism at best and open hostility at worst. But slowly, it started working. Whitmore's clients began to waver. One by one, they came to the Vales with questions, with concerns, with offers to renegotiate. Within a month, 3 of Whitmore's biggest accounts had switched sides. The man himself showed up at their office, his face red with fury. "You think you're clever?" he snarled at Lydia's father. "Using your daughter to play on people's sympathy?" "I'm using my daughter's brain," Richard said calmly. "Something you clearly lack." Whitmore's gaze swung to Lydia. "You should be at home, planning your next wedding. Oh, wait, no one will have you now, will they? Damaged goods." The words should have cut. 6 months ago, they would have destroyed her. Now, Lydia just smiled. "Mr. Whitmore, I could spend my time chasing marriage proposals from mediocre men, or I could spend it taking your business apart piece by piece. Guess which one I find more satisfying?" His face went purple. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then turned and stormed out. Her father waited until the door slammed before he started laughing, a deep, genuine sound she hadn't heard in years. "What?" Lydia asked. "Nothing. Just, you reminded me of myself just then, back when I was young and angry and ready to burn the whole world down to prove a point." "Did you? Burn it down?" He shook his head. "No, I built something instead. Turns out that's a better revenge." Lydia thought about that for a long time. 2 years. 2 years of grinding work, of proving herself over and over, of learning to navigate a world that didn't want her in it. Lydia transformed from her father's assistant into his partner, her name appearing on contracts right alongside his. The Vale Shipping Company grew, expanded, thrived. And Lydia grew with it. She was 25 now, and London society had mostly stopped talking about her wedding day. There were newer scandals, fresher gossip. She'd become something else in their eyes. Not quite respectable, not quite ruined. Something in between. A curiosity. She'd learned to live with it. She'd also learned to live alone. There were no suitors now, no garden parties or whispered promises. Men looked at her differently these days, with wariness, with calculation, sometimes with a hint of fear. She'd become too sharp, too ambitious, too difficult. She told herself she didn't care. Most days, she even believed it. Then one afternoon in late autumn, her father came home with news that would change everything. "We've been invited to the Ashford estate for the weekend," he announced. Lydia looked up from her ledgers. "The same Lady Ashford who called me unmarriageable at my non-wedding?" "The very same. Seems she's throwing a party and wants to show off her new business venture. Something about importing French wines. And she wants our advice? She wants to make a deal, and she specifically requested you be there." Lydia's eyebrows rose. "That's surprising. It's strategic. You've made a name for yourself, whether she likes it or not. She needs what you know." He paused. "I told her we'd think about it." "Tell her yes." "Lydia, I'm not afraid of her father, and I'm certainly not going to hide from a business opportunity because someone once hurt my feelings." Richard studied her. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She wasn't, not entirely. But she'd learned that confidence was like armor. Sometimes you had to put it on, even when you didn't feel it, and eventually, it became real. The Ashford estate was everything Lydia remembered. Sprawling grounds, marble halls, the kind of old money that whispered rather than shouted. Lady Ashford greeted them at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Vale, Miss Vale, how delightful." "Lady Ashford," Lydia said coolly, "thank you for the invitation." The weekend was a careful dance. Business discussions during the day, polite conversation at dinner, the constant awareness that everyone was watching, waiting to see if Lydia would crack. She didn't. She negotiated shipping rates with the same calm precision she brought to everything now. She smiled at Lady Ashford's barbs and returned them with interest. She held her own. And on the second evening, at a dinner party crowded with faces she half remembered, she met Adrian Cross. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that suggested either deep thought or complete boredom. He had a scar along his jaw, not disfiguring but noticeable, a reminder of something. Their eyes met across the room. Something shifted. "That's the Duke of Thornfield," someone whispered nearby. "Just returned from the continent. Military man. Very eligible." Lydia felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The old fear, the old wound. She turned away. But later, when the crowd thinned and people drifted into smaller groups, she found herself standing on the terrace, staring out at the dark gardens, and heard footsteps behind her. "Not a fan of parties?" a voice asked. She turned. The Duke stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Not particularly," she admitted. "Good. Neither am I." He moved to stand beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Adrian Cross." "Lydia Vale." "I know. You're the woman who destroyed Gerald Whitmore's shipping empire in under 3 months." She blinked. "You follow trade gossip?" "I follow anything that involves people refusing to know their place." He smiled slightly. "Apparently you were supposed to quietly disappear after some personal tragedy, and instead you decided to become a terror to incompetent businessmen. I respect that." Lydia didn't know what to say. She'd expected pity, or worse, the kind of hungry interest some men showed when they thought a woman's scandal made her vulnerable. This was something else. "What brings you back to England?" she asked, changing the subject. "Duty. My father died 6 months ago. Left me a dukedom and a mountain of problems." He took a sip of whiskey. "I'd rather be back in Portugal, honestly. Simpler there." "Fighting a war is simpler than managing an estate?" "In war, you know who your enemies are. In drawing rooms, everyone smiles while they sharpen their knives." Lydia laughed, a real laugh, the first in longer than she could remember. "That's remarkably accurate." They talked until the stars came out, trading observations about society's absurdities, about the gap between what people said and what they meant. Adrian was blunt in a way that should have been rude, but somehow wasn't. He didn't dance around topics or offer empty flattery. When she finally went inside, her father was waiting. "The Duke?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "A conversation, nothing more." But she thought about that conversation all night, and when she came down to breakfast the next morning and found Adrian already there, reading a newspaper and ignoring Lady Ashford's attempts at matchmaking, something inside her eased. Maybe, she thought, the world wasn't entirely made of people waiting to hurt her. Maybe some of them were just as tired and scarred and done with pretense as she was. It was a small hope, but it was enough. The weeks after the Ashford estate passed in a strange rhythm. Lydia found herself thinking about Adrian Cross more than she wanted to admit. The way he'd looked at her without pity, the conversations that felt like verbal sparring matches instead of the usual empty pleasantries. But London was a small world for people of their station, and she didn't see him again. Until he showed up at her father's office on a Tuesday morning in December. Lydia was elbow-deep in shipping manifests when the door opened. She glanced up, ready to dismiss whoever it was, and froze. Adrian stood in the doorway, looking slightly out of place among the stacks of ledgers and maps. He was dressed for business, dark coat, simple cravat, but he carried himself like a soldier, all controlled stillness and watchful eyes. "Miss Vale," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." She set down her pen slowly. "That depends on why you're here." "Business." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I need shipping expertise. Someone told me you're the best in London." "Someone lied. I'm the second best. My father's the best." "Your father's reputation is built on 30 years of experience. Yours is built on 2 years of making grown men cry. I'll take the one who scares people." Despite herself, Lydia smiled. "What do you need?" He pulled out a chair and sat without asking permission. Another thing she liked about him. No pretense. "My estate in Northumberland produces wool, good quality, but we've been selling locally for decades. I want to export to the continent, but I don't know the first thing about international shipping." "Why now?" "Because the estate's drowning in debt and sitting on a product people want. Seems stupid not to use that." He met her eyes. "I'm told you have contacts in Belgium and the Netherlands." "I do." "And I'm told you don't work cheap." "I don't work at all for people I don't trust." "Fair." He leaned back, studying her. What would it take to earn that trust? The question caught her off guard. Most men would have blustered, would have thrown money or connections at her until she agreed. Adrian just asked. "Tell me why you really want this," she said. "Not the debt story, the real reason." He was quiet for a long moment. "The people who work my land have been there for generations. Their families depend on the estate staying solvent. If it fails, they lose everything." He paused. "I spent 5 years fighting a war. I'm done watching people suffer because of someone else's incompetence, even if that someone is me." Lydia believed him. She didn't want to let herself trust a man's words again, but something in his voice rang true. "I'll look at your numbers," she said. "No promises beyond that." "That's all I'm asking." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "There's a lecture at the Royal Society tonight. Some bore talking about Mediterranean trade routes. I have tickets, if you're interested." It wasn't quite an invitation to dinner, wasn't quite a business meeting. It was something in between, safe, neutral territory. "What time?" Lydia asked. His smile was quick and genuine. 7. After he left, her father emerged from his private office where he'd clearly been eavesdropping. "The Duke of Thornfield?" "It's business, father." "Is it?" Lydia didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself. That evening, she changed her dress 3 times before settling on something simple. Dark green silk, high-necked, entirely appropriate for an academic lecture. Emma watched from the doorway, grinning. "It's not what you think," Lydia said. "I'm not thinking anything, except that you're wearing your good earrings." "They're all good earrings. The ones Mother gave you for your 18th birthday, the ones you never wear." Emma's grin widened. Definitely not thinking anything. Lydia threw a pillow at her. The lecture was exactly as boring as Adrian had promised. The speaker droned on about shipping lanes and tariff structures while the audience slowly lost the will to live. But sitting next to Adrian in the dim lecture hall, Lydia found she didn't mind. He made quiet, cutting observations about the speaker's outdated theories. She countered with her own analysis. They weren't watching the lecture so much as quietly demolishing it together. Afterward, they walked through the cold December streets, their breath misting in the air. You were right about the Mediterranean routes, Adrian said. He's working from data that's 5 years old. 10 years, actually. The French blockades changed everything. He clearly hasn't adjusted. Do you ever get tired of being right? Never. He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. I believe you. They stopped outside her father's townhouse. The windows glowed warm against the dark street. Lydia should have gone inside, should have thanked him politely and ended the evening. Instead, she said, "Your wool operation. I looked at the preliminary numbers you sent. It's viable, but you're thinking too small." How so? You want to ship to Belgium, fine, but you're sitting on premium wool in a market that's starving for quality materials. You should be looking at Paris, Milan, even London. Build the reputation first, then expand. Adrian was quiet, processing. That would require more capital up front. It would require better contracts and a willingness to take a risk. The capital will follow if the foundation is solid. She paused. I could help with that, if you're serious. I'm serious. He met her eyes. But I need to know something first. What? Why are you helping me? We barely know each other. The question was blunt, almost rude. Lydia appreciated that. Because you asked honestly instead of expecting me to fall over myself to assist a duke, she said. And because your project is interesting, I'm bored with safe bets and cautious men. You're neither. Careful. That almost sounded like a compliment. Don't let it go to your head. They stood there in the cold, the space between them charged with something Lydia couldn't quite name. It wasn't the breathless romance of her failed engagement. This was sharper, more real. Two people who'd both been ground down by the world, recognizing something familiar in each other. I should go, she said finally. Probably. Neither of them moved. Then the door opened and Emma appeared, wrapped in a shawl. Lydia, are you going to stand out here all night, or… Oh! She spotted Adrian and her eyes went wide. I'm interrupting. You're not, Lydia said quickly. We were just finishing. Adrian bowed slightly. Miss Emma, Miss Vale, thank you for the evening. He walked away into the darkness and Emma grabbed Lydia's arm. That's the Duke everyone's talking about? People are talking about him? Everyone's talking about him. War hero, mysterious, supposedly impossible to impress. And he just spent 3 hours with you looking at you like what? Like you matter. Lydia pulled her sister inside before she could say anything else. But later, lying in bed, she thought about Emma's words. Like you matter. When was the last time someone had looked at her that way? The next morning, she sent Adrian a detailed proposal for his wool export business. By evening, he'd agreed to all her terms. Within a week, they were negotiating contracts with buyers in 3 countries. Working with Adrian was different from working with her father or the usual merchants. He asked questions, challenged her assumptions, pushed back when he disagreed. He treated her like an equal, not a woman to be handled carefully or a scandal to be avoided. He also showed up at her office at odd hours with coffee and pastries, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. You live in Mayfair, Lydia pointed out. This is not your neighborhood. I have terrible sense of direction. You were a military officer. You literally navigated troops through enemy territory. See? Terrible. She threw him out, but she was smiling when she did it. The invitations started arriving in January. Dinner parties, social calls, requests for her presence at various functions. At first, Lydia thought it was a mistake. Society had written her off years ago, but her mother explained with barely contained excitement. It's the Duke, darling. People see you working with him, see him seeking your company, and suddenly you're interesting again. I don't want to be interesting because of a man. I know, but you can use it anyway. Her mother was right, though Lydia hated to admit it. The same people who'd mocked her at the altar now smiled at her in ballrooms. Lady Ashford, who'd called her unmarriageable, invited her to tea. The shift was nauseating in its transparency. They're vultures, she told Adrian one afternoon. They were reviewing shipping schedules in her father's office, papers spread across every surface. Who? Society. They tore me apart 2 years ago. Now they want to be my friend because you decided I'm worth talking to. Adrian set down the document he was reading. And that bothers you? It enrages me. Good. Use it. He leaned back in his chair. You think I don't know how this works? I spent 5 years killing people for king and country. Came home expecting gratitude, maybe some respect. Instead, I got whispers about my scar, questions about whether I'm suitable for polite company. His voice was bitter. But I'm a duke with money and land, so they smile anyway. It's all performance. So what do? We play the game. Well, take their invitations, their smiles, their shallow friendship. Build your business, expand your influence, make yourself indispensable. Then, when they try to tear you down again, and they will, you'll be too powerful to touch. It was calculating, almost cruel. It was also exactly what Lydia had been thinking. When did you get so ruthless? She asked. When I realized nice people finish last. He picked up his papers again. Now, about these Belgian contracts. They worked until dark, until the office grew cold, and the candles burned low. It was becoming a pattern, long hours together, conversations that veered from business to personal and back again, a comfortable rhythm that felt dangerously close to partnership. Lydia tried not to think about what that meant, but then Adrian started appearing at social functions where she'd be present. He'd find her in crowded ballrooms and draw her into conversations about trade policy or estate management, topics that cleared the room of everyone except the genuinely interested. He'd offer his arm for dinner processions, ensuring she was seated somewhere she could actually contribute instead of being relegated to the women's gossip corner. He was, she realized, deliberately making space for her in a world that wanted to diminish her. You don't have to do this, she told him one night. They were standing on yet another terrace, escaping yet another boring party. Do what? Defend me. Include me. Whatever you're doing. I'm not defending you. I'm enjoying intelligent conversation. There's a difference. He glanced at her. Unless you want me to stop. No. The word came out too quickly. I just don't understand why. Why what? Why you're not afraid of me. Everyone else is either afraid or thinks I'm broken. You just aren't. Adrian was quiet for a moment. You know what I learned in the war? The people who survive aren't the ones without scars. They're the ones who figure out how to keep moving anyway. He met her eyes. You're not broken, Lydia. You're just done pretending. Something cracked open in her chest, not painfully, but like a door she'd kept locked for too long finally swinging open. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Do what? Trust someone, let someone in. I tried that once and some coward destroyed it. I know. His voice was gentle but firm. But I'm not Thomas Harrington. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't run when things get difficult. How do I know that? You don't. Not yet. Trust isn't given. It's earned. He turned to face her fully. So let me earn it. I'll keep showing up, keep being honest, keep treating you like the formidable woman you are instead of the victim people want you to be. And eventually, maybe you'll believe I mean it. Lydia wanted to argue, to push him away, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. Instead, she said, Okay. Show me. Prove it. But know that I'm watching and I don't forgive easily. Adrian smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. They stood there in the cold, and Lydia felt something shift. Not love. She wasn't ready for that word, might never be ready for it. But possibility. The fragile beginning of something that could become real if neither of them destroyed it first. Then the terrace door burst open and Lady Ashford appeared, her face flushed with wine and malice. Oh, how cozy, she said, her voice carrying back into the ballroom. The jilted bride and the scarred soldier, what a pair you make! Lydia felt Adrian tense beside her, but she stepped forward before he could respond. Lady Ashford, still drinking cheap wine and pretending it's vintage? How very on brand. The older woman's eyes narrowed. You have quite the mouth on you these days, Miss Vale. I suppose that's what happens when a woman gives up on propriety. No, this is what happens when a woman stops caring what bitter people think. Lydia smiled sweetly. Tell me, how is your son? Still unable to hold a conversation without putting women to sleep? Gasps came from the doorway where other guests had gathered to watch. Lady Ashford went pale, then red. You insolent! Careful, Adrian said quietly, moving to stand beside Lydia. You're addressing a woman who controls half the shipping routes you depend on for your wine imports, and you're doing it at a party where everyone is watching. Choose your next words wisely." The threat was subtle but clear. Lady Ashford looked between them, calculating. Then she turned and swept back inside, her dignity in tatters. The crowd dispersed, whispers following in their wake. "That was stupid," Lydia said, but she was grinning. "Probably. But you should have seen your face." Adrian was grinning too. "That's the Lydia Vale I heard about, the one who makes powerful men nervous." "You're not nervous?" "Terrified. But I like it." They left the party together, walking through London's dark streets, and Lydia felt lighter than she had in years. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped making herself smaller to fit into other people's expectations, and she'd found someone who didn't want her to. The next few weeks blurred together. Adrian's wool exports launched successfully, so successfully that other estate owners started approaching Lydia for similar help. Her reputation grew from "that jilted bride" to "the woman who understands international trade better than most men." Her father started stepping back, letting her take the lead in negotiations. Her mother stopped asking when she'd settle down and start asking about her latest business venture. Emma started calling her terrifying with obvious admiration. But the old guard of London society didn't take the shift quietly. It started with small things. Invitations that mysteriously got lost, whispers at parties about women overstepping their place, pointed comments about how unnatural it was for a lady to concern herself with business. Then Gerald Whitmore made his move. He started a rumor, carefully crafted, just believable enough to spread, that Lydia had been manipulating clients through improper means. Seduction, blackmail, using her scandal as leverage to make men uncomfortable. It was lies, all of it. But lies didn't need to be true to be effective. Within days, 3 of her newest clients pulled their contracts. 2 more requested meetings to discuss concerns. Her father's office was flooded with letters questioning her integrity, her methods, her right to be involved in business at all. "This is Whitmore's revenge," Richard said, his face grim. "He's been waiting for an opening." Lydia sat in her office, staring at the letters, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. She'd fought so hard to build this, and now, because she was a woman who dared to succeed, they were trying to tear it all down. "What do we do?" Emma asked. She'd been helping with correspondence lately, learning the business. "We fight back," Lydia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How?" "He's not making specific accusations we can refute. He's just poisoning the well." She was right. That was the genius of Whitmore's attack. It wasn't anything Lydia could directly counter. It was innuendo, suggestion, the slow erosion of reputation. That evening, Adrian showed up at her door. "I heard," he said. "Of course you did. All of London's probably heard by now." He pushed past her into the house, his face dark with anger. "This is Whitmore." "Yes." "Then we destroy him." "How?" "Adrian, he's not playing by rules we can fight. He's attacking my character, my—" "Then we make him play by different rules." Adrian paced the room like a caged animal. "He's built his attack on the assumption that you're vulnerable, that society will turn on you again like they did before. So we prove him wrong." "And how do we do that?" He stopped pacing and looked at her. "Marry me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lydia stared at him. "What?" "Marry me," Adrian repeated. "Not because I'm trying to rescue you or because I pity you. Marry me because together we're stronger than anything Whitmore can throw at us. Because you're the only person I've met who challenges me instead of flattering me. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't want this." "This is insane." "Probably, but it would work. A duke's wife can't be touched by rumors from a bitter merchant. Your business becomes our business, protected by title and money. And Whitmore loses the thing he wants most, the satisfaction of destroying you." Lydia's mind raced. It was strategic, almost mercenary. It was also exactly the kind of bold move that could save everything she'd built. "But I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I stood at an altar once and believed in promises. I wore white and smiled and thought I knew what I was doing, and when it fell apart, it nearly destroyed me." Her voice cracked. I can't do that again, Adrian. I can't put myself in a position where someone has that much power over me. He moved closer, his voice gentle. I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking you to trust what we've already built. These past months, working together, talking together, that's real. You know who I am. You know I show up when I say I will, that I mean what I say. This isn't a leap of faith. It's a calculated risk based on evidence. But what if I leave? What if I change? What if this all goes wrong? He caught her hands. Those are real fears. But you can't let fear make all your decisions, Lydia. Sometimes you have to take the risk anyway. She pulled away, her breathing unsteady. I need time. Take it. But Whitmore won't wait. Every day you delay, he gains ground. After Adrian left, Lydia sat in the dark, paralyzed by competing thoughts. Marrying him made perfect sense strategically. It would solve the immediate problem, strengthen her position, give her protection she desperately needed. But marriage meant vulnerability. It meant trusting someone with her future, her heart, her sense of self. And the last time she'd done that, she'd ended up standing alone in a church, while hundreds of people watched her dreams collapse. You're thinking too hard. She looked up. Her father stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I thought you were asleep, she said. Hard to sleep when my daughter's world is falling apart. He came in and sat down heavily. Adrian proposed? How did you... I'm not blind, and I'm not stupid. He sighed. Are you going to say yes? I don't know. Why not? Because I'm afraid, Father. I'm terrified of making the same mistake twice. Richard was quiet for a long moment. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and used it to become someone extraordinary. You didn't just survive that church, Lydia. You turned it into fuel. He met her eyes. But if you let fear keep you from living, then Thomas Harrington wins anyway. He doesn't have to be at the altar. He just has to live in your head, keeping you from taking risks. What if Adrian leaves like Thomas did? Then you'll survive that too. But what if he doesn't? What if this is real, and you throw it away because you're too afraid to try? The question sat heavy between them. After her father left, Lydia sat alone in the dark and made a decision. She would not run. Not from Whitmore's attacks, not from society's judgment, and not from the possibility of something good, but she would do it on her terms. The next morning, she sent Adrian a message. Meet me at the church, St. Margaret's, noon. He was waiting when she arrived, standing in the same spot where Thomas should have stood 2 years ago. The church was empty now, cold and echoing. Lydia? His voice was uncertain. She walked up the aisle slowly, feeling the weight of memory pressing down on her. Every step was a battle, but she kept moving. I'll marry you, she said when she reached him. But I have conditions. Name them. This is a partnership, not a rescue. My business remains mine. I make my own decisions. You don't get to protect me from things because you think I'm fragile. I'm not. Agreed. And if you ever make me feel the way Thomas did, if you humiliate me or betray me or make me regret this, I will take everything from you. Your reputation, your business connections, your standing in society. I will burn it all down. Adrian didn't flinch. Fair. I'm serious, Adrian. I'm not the girl who stood here 2 years ago. I'm harder now, meaner. I will not be anyone's victim ever again. I know. That's why I want to marry you. He stepped closer. You think I want some docile wife who says yes to everything? I want the woman who threatened Lady Ashford at a party, who made Gerald Whitmore cry, who looks at me like she's deciding whether I'm worth the risk. Am I making a mistake? Probably. But we'll make it together. She looked around the church, the same pews, the same altar, the same space where her old life had ended. Coming here had been the hardest thing she'd done since that day, but she'd needed to face it, needed to prove she could stand in this place and not shatter. 3 weeks, she said. We get married in 3 weeks. Here, same church. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You want to get married where I was abandoned? Yes. I want everyone who watched me fail to watch me succeed. I want to look at these pews and know I took back what they tried to steal. I want to rewrite this place. A slow smile spread across his face. You're absolutely ruthless. Is that a problem? Not even a little. They stood there in the empty church, and Lydia felt something shift inside her, the old fear loosening its grip, making room for something fiercer. She was done running, done hiding, done letting other people's cruelty define her story. In 3 weeks, she would walk down this aisle again, and this time she wouldn't be alone. News of the engagement spread through London like wildfire, and the reaction was immediate and vicious. Lydia had expected resistance. What she got was war. The morning after she and Adrian announced their plans, her father's office received 17 letters. 14 were from business associates expressing concern about the family's judgment. 3 were outright cancellations of existing contracts. "They're afraid," Richard said, tossing the letters onto his desk with disgust. "Afraid that if you marry a duke, you'll have too much power." "Or they're afraid I'll use that power against them," Lydia said. She was reading through the correspondence with clinical detachment, noting who'd turned on them and who'd stayed silent. "Most of these men have underestimated me at some point. They know I remember." Emma burst into the office without knocking, her face pale. "Lydia, you need to see this." She thrust a newspaper across the desk. The Society column, written by an anonymous gossip known only as The Observer, featured a lengthy piece about the engagement. Lydia skimmed it, her jaw tightening with every line. The Duke of Thornfield's announcement has set tongues wagging across London. That he would choose Miss Lydia Vale, a woman whose reputation was destroyed by abandonment at the altar, speaks either to remarkable forgiveness or questionable judgment. One wonders if the Duke fully understands what he's taking on. Miss Vale has spent recent years involving herself in business matters most unsuitable for a lady, and her sharp tongue has made enemies of some of society's most respected families. Can such a woman truly make a proper duchess? Or is His Grace simply too scarred by war to see clearly? "Scarred by war," Lydia read aloud, her voice flat. "They're actually suggesting Adrian's brain damaged." "It gets worse," Emma said quietly. "Keep reading." Sources close to the family suggest the engagement may be more strategy than romance. Miss Vale's business ventures have come under scrutiny recently, with whispers of improper conduct. How convenient that she should find a titled protector at precisely the moment her reputation faces new threats. One can't help but wonder if the Duke is being manipulated by a woman desperate to salvage her standing. Lydia set the paper down carefully, fighting the urge to set it on fire. Who wrote this? No one knows. The Observer's identity is one of London's great mysteries. Her father's voice was grim. But someone fed them this information. Someone who knows exactly what buttons to push. Whitmore. Almost certainly. Richard stood, pacing. This is worse than I thought. He's not just attacking your business now. He's attacking the engagement itself. If he can make people believe you're manipulating Adrian, he destroys both your reputation and any protection the marriage would offer. A knock at the door interrupted them. Adrian entered without waiting for permission, his face dark as a thunderstorm. He was holding the same newspaper. Did you see this? He demanded. Just read it. It's character assassination, calculated, deliberate. He stopped, visibly controlling his anger. I'm going to find out who's behind this and end them. We know who's behind it, Lydia said. Gerald Whitmore. And we can't just end him without proof. Then we get proof. How? The Observer's anonymous. Whitmore's too smart to leave evidence of pain for a smear campaign. We're fighting shadows, Adrian. He threw the paper down. So what do we do? Let them tear you apart? Let them question my judgment and your integrity until the wedding becomes a circus? No. Lydia stood, her mind already working through possibilities. We do exactly what we planned. We get married in 3 weeks at St. Margaret's, and we make it impossible for anyone to question why. We show them a partnership so solid that the rumors look ridiculous by comparison. And until then? Until then, we give them nothing to work with. No public arguments, no visible cracks. We present a united front. She looked at her father. And we find out who else Whitmore has in his pocket. He didn't create this campaign alone. Someone's helping him, feeding him information, giving him ammunition. We find them. We cut off his supply. Richard nodded slowly. I'll put out some inquiries. quietly. Over the next week, the attacks intensified. More newspapers picked up the story, each adding their own speculation. Anonymous letters appeared, suggesting Adrian was either a fortune hunter going after the Vale shipping money or a fool being led around by a scheming woman. Someone started a rumor that Lydia had been secretly meeting Adrian while still engaged to Thomas Harrington, rewriting history to make her the villain of her own abandonment. Invitations dried up. The few social events Lydia did attend became minefields of pointed questions and false sympathy. "My dear, are you certain you're ready for this?" one matron asked at a tea party, her voice dripping with concern. "Marriage is such a commitment, and after your previous disappointment—" "I'm quite certain," Lydia replied with a smile that showed teeth. "Though I appreciate your worry. How is your husband? Still spending his evenings at that gaming house on Fleet Street?" The woman went white and excused herself. "You're making enemies," Emma whispered. "I already have enemies. Now I'm just being honest about it." But the strain was showing. Lydia stopped sleeping well, lying awake, running through scenarios, trying to anticipate the next attack. She snapped at her staff, withdrew from Emma's attempts at comfort, spent hours in her office going over contracts and correspondence as if the answers might be hidden in the numbers. Adrian found her there one night past midnight, slumped over her desk with cold tea and crumpled papers everywhere. "You're going to make yourself sick," he said. She didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You're not. You've lost weight. You have shadows under your eyes. When's the last time you ate?" "I don't remember." She rubbed her face tiredly. "Does it matter?" He pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "Talk to me." "About what?" "About whatever's eating you alive right now." Lydia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was raw. "I thought I was past this. I thought I'd built something strong enough that they couldn't touch me. But they're doing it anyway, Adrian. They're taking everything I worked for and twisting it into proof that I'm manipulative, scheming, unworthy. And the worst part is—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "What?" "Part of me wonders if they're right. If marrying you is just another calculated move, another way to protect myself. What if I am using you?" Adrian reached across the desk and took her hand. "Then we're using each other. I'm getting a brilliant business partner who challenges me daily and doesn't let me get away with anything. You're getting protection and legitimacy and a very large house in Northumberland that desperately needs someone competent running it. Sounds like a fair trade to me." "That's not how marriage should work." "Why not? People marry for worse reasons all the time. At least we like each other. At least we're honest about what this is." "And what is it?" He was quiet, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I don't know yet, but I know I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. I know I'd rather spend an evening arguing with you about shipping routes than suffer through another mindless dinner party. I know that when I think about the future, you're in it." He met her eyes. "That's enough for now." Lydia wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this was real, that she wasn't just repeating old mistakes in a different form. But before she could respond, her father appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. "We have a problem," he said. They followed him to his private study where a man Lydia didn't recognize sat waiting. He was middle-aged, nondescript, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd. "This is Mr. Fletcher," Richard said. "He works for the Morning Chronicle. He came to me with information." Fletcher stood looking uncomfortable. "Your Grace, Miss Vale. I apologize for the late hour, but this couldn't wait." He pulled out a folder. "I've been investigating the Observer, the anonymous columnist, for months. My editor thought there might be a story in unmasking them." "And?" Adrian's voice was sharp. "I found something. The Observer isn't one person. It's a group of people pooling gossip and paying for stories, and one of the main contributors is—" He hesitated. "It's your former fiancé, Miss Vale. Thomas Harrington." The words hit like a physical blow. Lydia sat down hard, the room spinning. "That's impossible," she said. "Thomas wouldn't—" He apologized. He said he regretted everything. "He lied." Fletcher opened the folder, revealing correspondence in Thomas's handwriting. "He's been feeding the Observer information about you for over a year. Private details about your business, your social interactions, your relationship with the Duke. He's the one who started the rumors about manipulation and improper conduct." Lydia stared at the letters, unable to process what she was seeing. Thomas hadn't just abandoned her. He'd spent 2 years actively destroying her from the shadows. Why? The word came out broken. According to these letters, he blames you for his own failures. After he left you at the altar, his reputation suffered. He lost his position, his social standing. He convinced himself it was your fault, that if you just quietly disappeared like you were supposed to, he could have recovered. Instead, you became successful, and every bit of your success felt like an insult to him. Adrian was reading over the letters, his face murderous. He's been coordinating with Whitmore. They've been working together to destroy you. Fletcher nodded. Whitmore provided funding and business intelligence. Harrington provided personal details and social connections. Together, they built a campaign designed to isolate you completely. Lydia felt something crack inside her. Not her spirit, but the last fragile hope that Thomas had been simply weak, simply afraid. He hadn't just hurt her accidentally. He'd done it deliberately, repeatedly, with calculated malice. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked Fletcher. "Because it's wrong, and because the Observer is about to publish something worse." He pulled out another paper. "They're planning to run a story the day before your wedding claiming that you and the Duke engaged in improper relations before the engagement. They're going to destroy both your reputations." "Based on what evidence?" Adrian demanded. "Fabricated testimony from anonymous sources. But by the time anyone proves it's false, the damage will be done. The wedding will be a scandal. Miss Vale's business will be destroyed. Your reputation, Your Grace, will be permanently tainted." Silence filled the room. Lydia felt the trap closing around her, perfectly constructed, impossible to escape. If they canceled the wedding, she looked guilty. If they went through with it, they'd be walking into a public humiliation that would make the first abandonment look gentle. "There has to be a way to fight this," Emma said from the doorway. No one had noticed her arrive, but she was standing there with tears streaming down her face, looking at her sister with fierce determination. "There's not," Lydia said quietly. "They've won." "No." Adrian's voice cut through the despair like a blade. "They haven't won, not yet." "Adrian, we expose them first. We take everything Fletcher found and we publish it ourselves. We show London exactly who's been behind the attacks and why. We destroy their credibility before they can destroy ours." "That will start a war," Richard warned. "We're already in a war. We've just been fighting defensively." Adrian looked at Lydia. "You said you wanted to rewrite the story of that church. So let's rewrite all of it. Let's take every weapon they've used against you and turn it back on them." Fletcher cleared his throat. "I can help with that. My editor hates the Observer. Been wanting to expose them for years. If you give me permission to publish these letters along with your side of the story, we can get it out before they publish their hit piece." "They'll retaliate," Lydia said, but her voice was stronger now. "Thomas and Whitmore won't take this quietly." "Let them retaliate. We'll be ready." Adrian's eyes were hard. "You told me once that you'd burn down anyone who tried to destroy you again. So let's burn them first." Lydia looked around the room at her father's grim determination, Emma's fierce loyalty, Fletcher's nervous courage, Adrian's unwavering support. She thought about Thomas, hiding in shadows while destroying her reputation. Thought about Whitmore, using her gender and her past as weapons. Thought about every person who'd decided she was acceptable collateral damage in their own petty wars. She thought about the girl who'd stood at that altar 2 years ago, believing in promises and happy endings. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, angrier, someone who didn't forgive. "Do it," she said. "Publish everything, and make sure Thomas Harrington's name is on every page." The story ran 2 days later under Fletcher's byline. It was devastating. Every letter, every piece of correspondence, every detail of the conspiracy laid bare for London to see. The Morning Chronicle presented it as investigative journalism, complete with verified sources and documentation. By noon, all of London was talking about it. By evening, Thomas Harrington had fled the city. Whitmore tried to deny his involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, his business partners were distancing themselves. Within 48, 3 of his biggest clients had pulled their contracts. The Observer issued a statement claiming they'd been deceived by false sources. and would be ceasing publication pending an internal review. It was victory, complete and crushing. But it came with a price. "You've made yourself a target," her father said the morning after publication. "Thomas and Whitmore have powerful friends. They won't forget this." "Good," Lydia said. "Let them remember what happens when they come after me." But the bravado was hollow. She'd spent 2 days barely sleeping, jumping at shadows, waiting for retaliation. Every letter that arrived might be a threat. Every visitor might bring news of some new attack. Adrian stayed close, a constant presence. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words, just stayed, worked beside her, made sure she ate and slept when her body demanded it. 3 days before the wedding, Lydia received a visitor. She was in the drawing room reviewing seating arrangements, a task that felt absurdly normal given everything else, when the butler announced Lady Margaret Thornfield, Adrian's mother. Lydia stood automatically, smoothing her dress. She'd never met the Dowager Duchess, but she knew the woman's reputation. Formidable, traditional, with very specific ideas about what made an appropriate duchess. Lady Margaret swept in with the kind of presence that filled a room. She was tall, elegant, with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Lydia with the assessment of a general surveying a battlefield. "Miss Vale, I've wanted to meet you for some time." "Your Grace," Lydia curtsied, hating how nervous she felt. "Would you like tea?" "No, I'd like honesty." Lady Margaret sat without being invited, arranging her skirts with precision. "My son is making the most important decision of his life, and I need to know if you're worth it." The bluntness was almost refreshing. Lydia sat down across from her. "What do you want to know? Did you trap him into this engagement?" "No." "Did you manipulate him using your business connections or your scandalous past?" "No." "Do you love him?" Lydia hesitated. It was the one question she hadn't expected, the one she had no easy answer for. "I don't know," she admitted. "I trust him, I respect him, I enjoy his company and value his judgment. But love? I'm not sure I'm capable of that anymore." Lady Margaret's expression didn't change. "Honest, at least." "Adrian told me you would be." She paused. "He also told me you're the strongest person he's ever met, that you survived something that would have destroyed most people and used it to become formidable. Is that true?" "I survived. I don't know about the rest." "You exposed a conspiracy that's been operating for 2 years. You turned a business disaster into an opportunity. You're about to marry a duke despite half of London thinking you're unsuitable." Lady Margaret leaned forward. "That sounds formidable to me." "Then why are you here? To tell me I'm not good enough for your son?" "On the contrary." The older woman's voice softened slightly. "I'm here to tell you that Adrian needs someone exactly like you, someone who won't let him hide behind his title or his war service, someone who challenges him, pushes him, refuses to let him settle for less than he's capable of." She stood. "My son has been to war. He's seen terrible things, done terrible things. He came home broken in ways most people don't see. And then he met you, someone who understands what it means to rebuild yourself from ruins. You're good for him, Miss Vale. Don't let society's opinion convince you otherwise." Lydia stood as well, thrown by the unexpected support. "I thought you'd be here to stop the wedding." 20 years ago, I might have been. But I've learned that titles and propriety matter far less than character. You have character, even if it's been forged in fire." Lady Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The people who attacked you, Harrington and Whitmore, they have allies who won't forgive what you've done. Watch yourself, Miss Vale. Wounded animals are the most dangerous." After she left, Lydia stood alone in the drawing room, processing the conversation. She'd expected judgment, possibly hostility. Instead, she'd gotten respect and a warning. The warning proved prophetic. That night, Lydia woke to smoke. It took precious seconds to realize what was happening. The acrid smell, the orange glow under her door, the crackling sound of flames. She grabbed her robe and ran into the hallway. Fire! The house was on fire. "Emma!" she screamed. "Father! Mother!" She ran to Emma's room first, throwing open the door. Her sister was already awake, coughing, wrapped in a blanket. "Get out," Lydia commanded. "Now, through the servants' stairs." "What about—" "I'll get them. Go!" She found her parents in the hallway, her father supporting her mother who was overcome by smoke. Together they stumbled toward the stairs, the heat growing more intense with every step. The fire had started in the front of the house and was spreading fast, too controlled. This wasn't an accident. They made it outside into the cold night air. Neighbors were gathering, servants running for water, someone shouting for the fire brigade. Lydia stood watching her home burn, her mind eerily calm. "This was deliberate," her father said hoarsely. "Look at the pattern. Multiple ignition points." He was right. The fire had been set intentionally, designed to trap them inside. Someone had tried to kill them. A carriage came thundering up the street, and Adrian jumped out before it fully stopped. His face when he saw Lydia was raw terror that quickly shifted to relief. "You're alive," he said, pulling her against him. "Someone set the fire." Her voice was flat, detached. "They tried to kill us." "Who?" He stopped, understanding. "Whitmore. Or Thomas. Or both." She pulled back, looking at the burning house. Everything she'd built, all the documents and contracts and careful records, it was all being destroyed. "They're willing to commit murder now. We pushed them too far." "Then we push further." Adrian's voice was hard. "We find proof, and we end this permanently." But before he could say more, someone in the crowd screamed. Lydia turned to see Emma pointing at a figure standing across the street, half hidden in shadow. A man watching the fire with what looked like satisfaction. Thomas Harrington. Their eyes met across the distance, and he smiled. The same smile he'd used when courting her, now twisted into something cruel. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. "That bastard!" Adrian started forward, but Lydia grabbed his arm. "Don't! He wants you to chase him, to do something stupid that we can't take back. He just tried to burn you alive." "I know." Her voice was ice. "And we're going to make him pay, but not like this. Not in a way that makes us the criminals." She stood there in her nightgown, covered in soot, watching her home burn, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd thought she understood ruthlessness. She'd thought she knew how far she was willing to go. She'd been wrong. Thomas Harrington had just taught her exactly how far enemies would go to destroy her. Now she would show him what happened when you turned someone who'd survived into someone who had nothing left to lose. The fire brigade arrived too late. By dawn, the house was a smoking ruin. Everything was gone: records, contracts, personal belongings, the life the Vale family had built over 3 decades. They stood in the street as the sun rose, covered in ash, and Lydia made a decision. "The wedding still happens," she said. "In 2 days, exactly as planned." "Lydia, we need to deal with," her father started. "No. This is what they want, for us to hide, to cancel, to show weakness. We're not giving them that." She looked at Adrian. "Are you still willing?" "More than ever." "Then we get married, at that church, in front of everyone. And we show Thomas Harrington and Gerald Whitmore and everyone else who thinks they can destroy us that we don't break." Emma grabbed her hand. "Where will we live? We have nothing left." "We have everything that matters," Lydia said fiercely. "We're alive. We're together. And we're going to burn them down the way they tried to burn us." She didn't know how yet, didn't know what evidence they could find, what legal recourse existed against attempted murder disguised as accident, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Thomas Harrington had just made the worst mistake of his life, and she was going to make sure he lived long enough to regret it. The Vale family spent that first night in Adrian's townhouse, crammed into guest rooms with borrowed nightclothes and nothing else. Lydia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's smile across the street, heard the crackle of flames, smelled smoke that wasn't there. At 3 a.m, she gave up and went downstairs. Adrian was already there, sitting in his study with papers spread across every surface and a cold cup of coffee at his elbow. "Can't sleep either?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and the exhaustion on his face mirrored her own. "Been trying to figure out how to prove arson without direct evidence. The fire brigade says it's inconclusive. Could be faulty wiring, could be deliberate. Without a witness or physical proof, we have nothing." Lydia sat down across from him. "Thomas was there. We saw him. We saw someone who looked like him in the dark from across a burning street. No magistrate will convict on that." He rubbed his face tiredly. And even if they would, he's already left London. Could be anywhere by now. What about Whitmore? Has an alibi. He was at his club all evening with a dozen witnesses. If he hired someone to set the fire, he covered his tracks well. They sat in frustrated silence. Lydia felt the old helplessness creeping back, the same sensation from 2 years ago when Thomas had left her standing at the altar with no recourse, no way to fight back. "We're still getting married tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Adrian's voice was firm. "Unless you've changed your mind." "Have you?" "Someone just tried to kill you. If anything, I'm more certain." He leaned forward. "Lydia, I know this started as strategy, as mutual benefit. But that fire, when I got the message, when I thought you might be—" He stopped, collecting himself. "I realized something. This isn't just about business anymore, not for me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was quite ready to examine. "We should try to sleep," Lydia said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Tomorrow's going to be impossible. But we'll manage." She stood to leave, then paused. "Adrian, thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet. We're walking into a church tomorrow with half of London expecting us to fail, the other half actively hoping for it." "Good," Lydia said. "I've always performed better when people underestimate me." The wedding morning dawned cold and gray, threatening rain. Lydia stood in Adrian's guest room wearing a dress that wasn't hers, borrowed from a cousin, hastily altered to fit. It was cream-colored, simple, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd worn 2 years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Harder, sharper, more dangerous. Emma appeared behind her, already dressed. "You look beautiful." I look like I've been through a war." "Same thing." Her sister squeezed her shoulders. "Are you ready?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Downstairs, Adrian was arguing with his mother. Lydia could hear their voices from the landing. "This is madness, Adrian. You're making yourselves targets." "We're already targets, Mother. At least this way we control the narrative." "By marrying in the same church where she was abandoned? You think that won't feed more gossip?" "I think it takes the weapon out of their hands. They can't use that church against her if she claims it first." Lydia descended the stairs. Lady Margaret turned to look at her, and something in the older woman's expression softened. "You're actually going through with this," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might have more sense." But there was respect in her voice. "Very well. If you're determined to do this, at least do it properly. You'll ride in the Thornfield carriage. The family crest will be visible to everyone. Let them see that you have our full support." It was a gesture of protection, of alliance. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you," she said. The carriage ride to St. Margaret's was silent. Lydia sat across from Adrian, their knees nearly touching in the small space. He was dressed formally, dark coat, pristine cravat, but his jaw was tight with tension. "We can still call this off," he said quietly. "Do you want to?" "No, but I need you to know you have the choice. Right up until you say the words, you can walk away. I won't hold it against you." Lydia thought about that, about walking away, about choosing safety over risk. 2 years ago, she would have taken it. She would have protected herself above all else, but she wasn't that woman anymore. "I'm not running," she said. "Not from this, not from anything. I'm done letting fear make my decisions." The church came into view, and Lydia's breath caught. The steps were crowded with people, far more than she'd expected. Some were invited guests, but many were simply spectators, come to watch the scandal unfold. "Vultures," Emma muttered. "Let them watch," Lydia said. "Let them see exactly how this ends." The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Adrian stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand. Lydia took it and emerged into a wall of noise, whispers, exclamations, the rustle of fabric as people jostled for better views. She kept her spine straight, her face calm, and walked up those church steps like she owned them. Inside, the pews were packed. She recognized faces from 2 years ago, some sympathetic, most curious, a few openly hostile. Lady Ashford sat near the front, her expression sour. Other families who'd turned their backs after the first wedding now watched with barely concealed interest. And there, In the back corner was Mr. Fletcher from the Morning Chronicle, with a notebook, recording everything. The vicar stood at the altar, the same man who'd waited with her 2 years ago, who'd watched her humiliation with kind, helpless eyes. Now he looked at her with something like admiration. "Miss Vale," he said quietly as she approached. "Welcome back. Thank you for agreeing to this. After what you've been through, I wouldn't have refused." He glanced at Adrian. "Your Grace, shall we begin?" The ceremony started, the traditional words, the familiar rhythms, but everything felt different this time. Lydia wasn't floating through a dream of romance and happy endings. She was wide awake, hyper-aware of every detail, the weight of Adrian's hand in hers, the watching crowd, the significance of standing in this exact spot and refusing to let it define her. When the vicar asked if anyone objected, Lydia actually held her breath. Part of her half expected Thomas to appear, to crash this wedding the way he'd destroyed the first one. But the church remained silent. "Adrian Cross, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. "Lydia Vale, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Adrian, at the scar on his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet strength that had never wavered even when her world caught fire. "I do." The vicar smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Adrian leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was more promise than passion. "We're in this together now, no turning back." When they turned to face the congregation, Lydia felt a surge of fierce triumph. She'd done it. She'd stood in this church that had once witnessed her destruction and used it as the foundation for something new. The crowd erupted into applause, some genuine, some forced, all of it acknowledgement that Lydia Vale had just rewritten her own story. The reception was held at Adrian's estate on the outskirts of London, a sprawling property that made the Vale family home look modest by comparison. Guests arrived in waves, some to celebrate, others clearly just to gossip. Lydia stood in the receiving line with Adrian, greeting people with practiced courtesy while mentally cataloging who was sincere and who was there to mine for scandal. "Congratulations, Your Grace," one woman said to Adrian, then turned to Lydia with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And to you as well, Duchess. What a remarkable transformation." "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. I've always believed in the value of resilience." "Indeed, though one does wonder what your first fiancé must think of all this." The comment was designed to wound, to remind everyone of the scandal. Adrian tensed beside her, but Lydia just smiled. "I imagine Mr. Harrington is too busy fleeing his creditors to think much about me. Did you hear his debts finally caught up with him? Gambling, I'm told. Such a shame when men lack self-control." Lady Pemberton's smile froze. She made some excuse and hurried away. "Nicely done," Adrian murmured. "I'm just getting started." As the evening progressed, something unexpected began to happen. People who'd avoided Lydia for 2 years started approaching her differently, not with pity or contempt, but with interest. Women asked about her business ventures. Men inquired about shipping routes and trade opportunities. The Duke and Duchess of Thornfield, it seemed, were a formidable combination worth cultivating. It was strategic, calculated, entirely self-serving, but it was also recognition. During dinner, her father pulled her aside. "I have news about the fire." Lydia's attention sharpened. "What is it?" "One of our former servants came forward. Said a man approached him 3 days before the fire, offered him money to leave the back door unlocked at a specific time. The servant refused, but he saw the man." "Who was it?" "Not Thomas. Not Whitmore either. Someone they hired, a man named Davies, low-level criminal with connections to both of them." "Can we prove the connection?" "Fletcher's working on it. He's traced payments from Whitmore's accounts to Davies. It's not definitive, but it's something." Richard's face was grim. "There's more. Davies has been arrested for another crime, assault. He's looking at years in prison unless he cooperates." "You think he'll turn on them?" "If we make it worth his while? Yes." Lydia felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "Then let's make it worth his while." Over the next week, while London society buzzed about the wedding and Lydia settled into her new role as Duchess, Fletcher worked his sources relentlessly. He met with Davies in prison, offered immunity in exchange for testimony. The man broke after 2 days, providing detailed accounts of how Whitmore had hired him, how Thomas had provided information about the Vale house's layout, how they'd planned the fire to look accidental. "He'll testify in court," Fletcher told them, meeting in Adrian's study with documents spread everywhere. "But we need corroborating evidence. A criminal's word alone won't be enough to convict men of their standing." "What about the financial records?" Lydia asked. She'd been poring over them for hours, cross-referencing payments and dates. "Whitmore's accountant is skilled. He's hidden the payments well." "Not well enough." Lydia tapped a ledger page. "Look here. 3 payments to a shell company, each dated exactly 1 week before Davies claims he met with Whitmore. The amounts match what Davies says he was paid. And this company? It doesn't exist except on paper." Fletcher leaned in, studying the entries. "This is good. This could work." "It's not enough," Adrian said. He'd been unusually quiet, standing by the window with his arms crossed. "We prove Whitmore hired Davies. We might get him for arson. But Thomas? He gave information, but he didn't set the fire himself. He could claim ignorance, say he was just talking and didn't know what Whitmore planned." "Then we need Thomas to incriminate himself," Lydia said. "How?" She was quiet for a long moment, an idea forming, dangerous, possibly illegal, definitely ruthless. "We make him think he's won. We spread a rumor that our evidence is weak, that we're dropping the investigation. We make him feel safe enough to come back to London, and then we get him to confess." "That's entrapment," Fletcher said. "Only if we force him to confess. If he does it voluntarily, say, to someone he thinks is an ally." She looked at Adrian. "Do you still have contacts from your military days? People who can be discreet?" Understanding dawned on his face. "You want to set a trap. I want justice, however we get it." Fletcher looked between them. "If this goes wrong, you could both end up in serious trouble." "We're already in serious trouble," Lydia said. "At least this way we control it." They planned meticulously. Fletcher spread word through his newspaper connections that the investigation had stalled, that without concrete evidence, authorities were unlikely to pursue charges. The story ran in several papers, each one lamenting the difficulty of prosecuting crimes without witnesses. Within days, word reached them that Thomas had returned to London, staying at a small hotel under an assumed name. "He thinks he's safe," Adrian's contact reported. He was a former Army intelligence officer named Captain Harris, now working as a private investigator. He's been drinking heavily, bragging to anyone who'll listen about how he outsmarted the Duke and his clever wife. "Can you get close to him?" Lydia asked. "Already have. He thinks I'm a sympathetic ear, another man wronged by ambitious women. He's surprisingly eager to talk." "Get him talking about the fire," Adrian said. "But don't push. Let him volunteer the information." Harris nodded. "Give me 3 days." Those 3 days were torture. Lydia threw herself into work, reorganizing her business from Adrian's estate, reaching out to contacts, rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. But every quiet moment, she thought about Thomas, imagined him free while her family's home was ashes, imagined him laughing about how he'd nearly killed them all. On the 3rd evening, Harris returned with a wax cylinder recording device. "I got it," he said simply, setting the device on the desk. They gathered around as he played it back. The recording was scratchy, barely audible in places, but Thomas's voice came through clearly enough. "Bloody genius, really. Whitmore wanted to just ruin her business, but I said no, that's not enough. She needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything. The fire was my idea. Davies was worried about people getting hurt, but I told him that was the point. Let them burn. Let her watch everything she built turn to ash, the way she turned my life to ash." The recording continued. Thomas drunkenly confessing to planning the fire, to coordinating with Whitmore, to watching from across the street as the Vale house burned. When it finished, the room was silent. "That's a confession," Fletcher said quietly. "That's enough to arrest him." "Can it be used in court?" Lydia asked, though she already knew the answer from Adrian's expression. "It's questionable. Obtained without his knowledge, possibly inadmissible." Harris looked apologetic. "But it's leverage. We can threaten to make it public, force him to confess officially. Or," Adrian said slowly, "we use it differently." He explained his plan, and with each word, Lydia felt a grim satisfaction building. It was ruthless, possibly cruel, and absolutely perfect. The next morning, Fletcher published a special edition of the Morning Chronicle. The front page featured a full transcript of Thomas's confession, presented as an exclusive interview where Thomas Harrington admitted to orchestrating arson and attempted murder. The article was devastating, every word damning, every detail damaging, but the genius was in the framing. Fletcher presented it as Thomas's own words, his own voluntary statement, complete with dates and details that could be verified independently. By noon, every newspaper in London had picked up the story. By evening, magistrates had issued warrants for both Thomas Harrington and Gerald Whitmore's arrests. Thomas tried to flee again, but this time Adrian's contacts were watching. He was arrested at a coaching inn, trying to buy passage to France with money he didn't have. Whitmore turned himself in, his lawyer already negotiating for leniency in exchange for testimony against Thomas. The trial happened faster than Lydia expected. Both men tried to recant, to claim they'd been tricked or misquoted, but the evidence was overwhelming. Davies's testimony, the financial records, the recording, witnesses who'd seen Thomas watching the fire, it all piled up until there was no defense left. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Lydia sat in the courtroom gallery next to Adrian, listening to the verdict, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Not triumph exactly. The victory was too grim for that, too tangled up in loss and pain and the knowledge that her family's home was still ashes. But closure. Finally, closure. After the sentencing, 7 years for Thomas, 5 for Whitmore, they walked out of the courthouse into a wall of reporters and spectators. Your Grace, how do you feel about the verdict? Duchess, what will you do now? Lydia stopped at the top of the steps, Adrian beside her, and looked out at the crowd. She saw familiar faces. Lady Ashford, surprisingly subdued, other society matrons who'd mocked her, business associates who'd turned their backs, and Fletcher, his notebook ready. Justice has been served, she said clearly. 2 men tried to destroy me because they couldn't accept that a woman could survive their cruelty and succeed anyway. They failed, and now they'll have years to contemplate that failure. She paused. As for what I'll do now, I'll do what I've always done. I'll build, I'll work. I'll prove every day that their opinions and their hatred mean nothing compared to my determination. The crowd erupted in questions, but Adrian guided her away to their carriage. Once inside, the noise muffled by curtains and distance, Lydia let out a shaky breath. That was quite a speech, Adrian said. Was it too much? It was perfect. He took her hand. You realize what you've just done? You didn't just defeat Thomas and Whitmore. You told every person who's ever underestimated you exactly what happens when they do. Good. Let them know. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice careful. Lydia, these past weeks, planning the trap, building the case, working together, I've realized something. What? This marriage started as strategy, mutual protection, combined resources, all very practical. He turned to face her. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real. Not the Duchess I married for political advantage, but the woman who sits in my study until 3 a.m. arguing about trade routes, who faces down crowds without flinching, who turned her greatest humiliation into her greatest strength. Lydia's throat tightened. Adrian, I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I know trust doesn't come easily for you, and I understand why. I'm just telling you that when I look at the future now, I don't see a business arrangement. I see a partnership with someone I actually want to spend my life with. Someone I... He stopped, then pushed forward. Someone I love. The words hung in the air between them. Lydia had spent 2 years building walls around her heart, convinced she'd never let anyone close enough to hurt her again. And here was Adrian, not demanding anything, just offering honesty. I don't know if I can say it back, she admitted. Not yet. The words feel too big, too dangerous. Then don't say them. Just consider the possibility that maybe this could be more than survival, that maybe we could actually be happy. Lydia looked at him, really looked, at the man who'd stood beside her through fire and scandal, who'd never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was, who'd helped her turn her enemies' weapons back on them. "I'll consider it," she said softly. "But Adrian, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was when we started this. I'm harder now, less forgiving. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of wife who fits into society's expectations." "Good. I don't want someone who fits expectations. I want you, sharp edges and all." She felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but letting light in for the first time in years. She wasn't ready to call it love yet. But maybe, possibly, eventually, she could be. The carriage arrived at the Thornfield estate just as the sun was setting. They walked inside together, and Lydia realized with a start that this was home now. Not the house that had burned, not her father's business office, but here, this sprawling estate with Adrian beside her. Emma was waiting in the drawing room, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you hear? It's all over London, the verdict, your speech, everything. People are calling you the most formidable woman in England." "Let them call me whatever they want," Lydia said. But she was smiling. That night, she stood in her new bedroom, her and Adrian's bedroom, though they'd maintained separate spaces by unspoken agreement, and looked at herself in the mirror again. The woman staring back was different from the one who'd stood at that altar 2 years ago. Different even from the one who'd stood there a week ago, reclaiming her story. This woman had scars, had sharp edges, had learned to fight dirty when necessary and show no mercy to those who tried to destroy her. This woman was a duchess now, but more importantly, she was someone who'd turned tragedy into strength. There was a knock at her door, Adrian being respectful of boundaries even now. "Come in," she called. He entered, still dressed from dinner. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. Today was a lot." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." She turned to face him. "Adrian, about what you said in the carriage, you don't have to respond now. Or ever, if you don't want to." "Stop talking and let me finish." She took a breath. "I can't promise I'll ever be easy to love. I'm difficult and stubborn, and I hold grudges forever. But I can promise that I'll try. To trust you, to let you in. To believe that this," she gestured between them, "could become something real instead of just strategic." "That's enough," Adrian said quietly. "That's more than enough." She crossed the room to him, and this time when they kissed, it wasn't just a promise or a performance. It was possibility, fragile and new, but real. They stood there in the quiet of the evening, two people who'd survived their own private wars, and Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the naive hope of her youth, the kind that believed in fairy tales and happy endings. This was harder, earned through fire and loss and the slow, painful work of rebuilding. But it was hope, nonetheless. And for the first time since standing at that altar 2 years ago, Lydia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could hold something better than survival. Maybe it could hold happiness too. The weeks following the trial settled into an unexpected rhythm. Lydia had braced herself for continued hostility, for society to find new ways to tear her down. Instead, something stranger happened. People started treating her with wary respect. Invitations arrived daily, not the obligatory kind meant to satisfy curiosity, but genuine requests for her presence at business dinners, charitable events, political gatherings. Women who'd once whispered about her now sought her advice. Men who'd dismissed her business acumen now asked for her consultation on trade matters. "It's unsettling," she told Emma one afternoon. They were in the Thornfield library, sorting through correspondence. "A month ago, half these people wanted me destroyed. Now they're acting like we're old friends." Emma looked up from a letter she was reading. "They're afraid of you now. That's different from respecting you, but it's useful." "When did you get so cynical?" "I learned from the best." Her sister grinned. "Besides, you earned this. You took down 2 powerful men who thought they were untouchable. People notice that kind of thing." Lydia supposed she was right, but the attention still felt hollow, transactional. She'd spent years building genuine expertise, proving her worth through actual work. Now people deferred to her out of fear of what she might do to them if they didn't. She wasn't sure which bothered her more, being dismissed or being feared. Adrian found her that evening in his study, surrounded by shipping manifests and financial reports. He'd learned to recognize the signs when she was working herself to exhaustion trying to outrun her own thoughts. "You're doing it again," he said from the doorway. "Doing what?" "Punishing yourself for something that isn't your fault." Lydia set down her pen. "I'm not punishing myself. I'm working." "It's 10 o'clock at night. You've been in here since breakfast." He came in and sat across from her. "What's really bothering you?" She was quiet for a long moment. Adrian had gotten better at waiting her out, at giving her space to articulate things she'd rather keep buried. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted finally. "Do what?" "Be happy. Be settled. Everyone's treating me differently now, being careful around me, and I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to find a new way to hurt me. I can't—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "I can't turn it off. The vigilance, the constant preparation for the next attack." Adrian leaned back, studying her. "You spent 2 years in survival mode. You can't expect to flip a switch and suddenly feel safe." "But I am safe now. Thomas is in prison. Whitmore's reputation is destroyed. My business is thriving. I have—" She gestured helplessly. "Everything I thought I wanted. So why does it still feel like I'm waiting for disaster?" "Because trauma doesn't care about logic." His voice was gentle but firm. "I spent 5 years at war, Lydia. Came home expecting to feel relieved, grateful to be alive. Instead, I jumped at loud noises for months, couldn't sleep in complete darkness, assumed everyone was a potential threat." He paused. "It takes time to convince your body that the danger's actually past." "How long did it take you?" "I'll let you know when it happens." He smiled wryly. "But it gets easier. The moments of peace get longer. The panic gets less frequent, and having someone who understands helps." Lydia felt something warm unfurl in her chest. They'd been married for weeks now, living in careful partnership, still navigating what their relationship was becoming. Some nights Adrian slept in his own room, respecting the boundaries she'd set. Other nights, increasingly often, he stayed with her, and they'd talk until dawn about everything and nothing. It wasn't the passionate romance she'd imagined as a girl. It was better, steadier, built on honesty instead of illusion. "I'm trying," she said, "to believe this is real, that you're not going to leave? Betray you? Turn out to be secretly terrible?" He shook his head. "Lydia, I wake up every morning grateful you said yes, even on days when you're impossible and stubborn and working yourself sick, especially those days, actually. They remind me that you're real, not some perfect fantasy. I'm far from perfect. Thank God. Perfect would be boring." She laughed despite herself. "You're ridiculous. And you're avoiding sleep again. Come on." He stood, offering his hand. "Whatever you're working on will still be here tomorrow." She let him pull her up, and they walked upstairs together. It was such a small thing, this casual domesticity, but it felt monumental to Lydia, proof that maybe, possibly, she was learning to trust again. The following week brought unexpected news. Her father appeared at the estate with documents and an expression Lydia couldn't quite read. "I've been thinking," Richard said without preamble. They were in the drawing room, Adrian having been summoned from his own work. "About the business. About the future." "What about it?" Lydia asked. "You've effectively been running Vale shipping for 2 years. You've expanded our routes, tripled our profits, and established connections I could never have managed." He set the documents on the table between them. "So I'm making it official. I'm transferring ownership to you, all of it." Lydia stared at him. "Father, you've earned it, more than earned it, and frankly, I'm tired. I want to retire, spend time with your mother, maybe travel before I'm too old to enjoy it." He pushed the papers toward her. "This is yours. It always should have been." She picked up the documents with shaking hands. Full ownership, transferred outright, not held in trust, not contingent on her marriage, not dependent on male oversight, just hers. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll stop trying to prove yourself to people who don't matter. You've already proven everything that counts." Richard's voice was gruff with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Lydia. I should have said that 2 years ago, but I'm saying it now. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and used it to become extraordinary. Lydia felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. Thank you. After her father left, she sat staring at the documents. Adrian sat beside her, quiet. Are you all right? He asked finally. I think so. It's more than I expected. More than I thought he'd ever give me. You deserve it. Do I? She looked at him. Adrian, I've been thinking about something. The business is mine now, completely, which means I can make decisions without worrying about anyone's approval. What kind of decisions? I want to do something with it, something that matters. She set down the papers, her mind already racing. There are women all over England stuck in situations like I was, dependent on men, economically vulnerable, one disaster away from ruin. I want to change that. Adrian's eyebrows rose. How? Start a program, training for women who want to learn business, trade skills, financial management. Give them the tools to be independent. Hire them in our company, create opportunities where there aren't any. She was talking faster now, the idea taking shape. Society says women can't handle business. Let's prove them wrong on such a massive scale they can't ignore it. That's going to make you even more enemies. I know, but I'm tired of playing it safe because people might disapprove. I spent 2 years being afraid of what people thought. I'm done with that. Adrian smiled, the full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Then let's do it. You run the program, I'll provide backing, and whatever resources you need. We'll make them so angry they won't know what hit them. You don't have to. I want to. Besides, someone once told me that the best revenge is building something so successful your enemies have to watch you thrive. He took her hand. Let's build something that outlasts all of them. They spent the next month developing the program. Lydia threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd once applied to survival, but this time it felt different. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong or defending herself. This was about creating something meaningful. They started small, advertising positions for women in the shipping office, offering training in accounting and contract negotiation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women showed up from across London, some young and hopeful, others older and desperate, all of them hungry for the chance to support themselves. I didn't expect this many, Emma said, looking at the line of applicants stretching down the street. I did, Lydia replied. I know what it's like to feel trapped with no options. They're not here because they want to work. They're here because they need to survive. She hired 20 women in the first wave, trained them personally, working alongside them to teach everything she'd learned. Some struggled with the concepts. Others took to it like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone to show them how. Within 3 months, Vale Shipping's all-female accounting division was outperforming every other department. London's business community noticed. The reactions were predictably mixed. Some praised the innovation, others condemned it as unnatural and dangerous. Several of Adrian's peers pulled him aside at social events to express concern about his wife's radical ideas. They're afraid, Adrian reported after one particularly awkward dinner party. One of them actually said you were setting a dangerous precedent, that soon women everywhere would be demanding jobs and independence. Good, Lydia said. Let them be afraid. Maybe they'll start treating women like people instead of property. But not everyone was hostile. Some women from society families started approaching Lydia quietly, asking questions about the program, wondering if there might be opportunities for their daughters or sisters. She welcomed them all, regardless of class or background. 6 months after the trial, Lydia stood in the expanded offices of Vale Shipping, now operating out of a building 3 times the size of the original, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine pride. Not the defensive pride of survival, but the satisfaction of building something that mattered. 50 women now worked for her company. Dozens more had gone through training and found positions elsewhere, carrying what they'd learned into other businesses. You're changing things, Lady Margaret said one afternoon. Adrian's mother had become an unexpected ally, using her social influence to promote the program among aristocratic families. Not just for these women, but for everyone. You're proving what's possible. I'm just giving people opportunities, Lydia protested. No, you're challenging the entire structure of how society operates. That's considerably more significant. The older woman smiled. And you're making my son happy, which I appreciate. He's different now, more engaged, more purposeful. You're good for each other. The comment stayed with Lydia as she walked home that evening. She and Adrian had settled into genuine partnership now, working together on business ventures, supporting each other's goals, sharing a life that felt real instead of strategic. But she still hadn't said the words. The ones Adrian had offered months ago, the ones that felt too big and dangerous to speak aloud. She found him in the garden, reading correspondence in the fading light. He looked up as she approached, and his face softened in the way that made her heart do uncomfortable things. "Productive day?" he asked. "Very. Lady Margaret says I'm changing society." "You are." "That wasn't actually my goal. I just wanted to help people." Sometimes that's how change happens. One small choice at a time, until suddenly everything's different. He set aside his papers. "Speaking of change, I have news. My estate in Northumberland is finally profitable. The wool exports we set up are exceeding projections." "That's wonderful." "It means I need to spend more time up there, probably a month or two. I was hoping—" He hesitated. "Would you come with me? I know your work is here, but I thought maybe you could bring some of it. Set up a northern branch of the training program." Lydia considered. Leaving London meant leaving her carefully built network, the security she'd created. But it also meant new opportunities, new challenges. "Yes," she said, "let's do it." They left for Northumberland in late autumn, when London's social season was winding down. The journey took 3 days by carriage, and Lydia watched the landscape change from crowded city to open countryside to wild, windswept moors. The estate was massive, rolling lands dotted with sheep, tenant farms stretching to the horizon, a stone manor house that looked like it had stood for centuries. "This is incredible," Lydia breathed, standing on the front steps and looking out over the property. "It's yours too now," Adrian reminded her. "Duchess of Thornfield means all of this is as much your responsibility as mine." The weight of that hit her. Not the title, she'd never cared about titles, but the responsibility to hundreds of people who depended on this land for their livelihood. It was daunting and exhilarating in equal measure. She spent the first week meeting with tenant farmers, talking to workers, understanding how the estate operated. Many of them were wary of her. A woman involving herself in business was unusual enough in London, but here in the north it was practically unheard of. But Lydia had learned that respect was earned through action, not words. She worked alongside them, learning about wool production and land management, asking questions and actually listening to the answers. Slowly, the wariness faded into cautious acceptance. "They're starting to trust you," Adrian observed one evening. They were in the estate library, reviewing production schedules. "Some of them. Others still think I'm a London interloper playing at being useful. Give them time. They said the same about me when I first came back from the war." "How did you win them over?" "Showed up every day. Kept my promises. Proved I wasn't going anywhere." He looked at her. "Same way you won me over, actually." Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't set out to win you over." "I know. That's why it worked." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling and rain pattering against the windows. It was peaceful here, away from London's constant scrutiny. For the first time in years, Lydia felt like she could breathe. "Adrian," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He set down his papers, giving her his full attention. "These past months, watching you, building this life together, I've been afraid. Afraid to trust it. Afraid to believe it's real." She took a breath. "But I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting what Thomas did control how I live now." "Lydia, let me finish." She stood, needing to move. "You told me months ago that you loved me, that this had become real for you. I couldn't say it back then. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to say it." Adrian was very still, watching her. "But I'm sure now. This thing between us, it's not what I expected love to look like. It's not the fairy tale I imagined as a girl. It's better. It's real. It's partnership and challenge, and choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult." She turned to face him. "I love you, not despite the mess and complications, but because of them. Because you've seen me at my worst and you're still here." He crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her, deep and certain and full of promise. When they broke apart, he was smiling. "Took you long enough," he said. "I'm difficult, remember?" "Yes, and I love you anyway." They stood there in the firelight, and Lydia felt something fundamental shift. Not healing exactly. Some wounds never fully healed, but acceptance. The past had happened, had shaped her, and she was done letting it define her future. The month in Northumberland stretched into 2, then 3. Lydia established a training program for the estate workers' daughters, teaching them skills that would let them support themselves. Some stayed on the estate, taking positions in administration and management. Others left for opportunities in nearby cities, carrying their knowledge with them. Word spread. Other estates started reaching out, asking for advice on similar programs. Lydia found herself consulting across the north of England, building a network that extended far beyond London's society circles. "You're becoming famous," Emma wrote in a letter. "People in London are calling you the woman who reformed Northern industry. Father says business leaders are actually taking women seriously now because of your example." It was more influence than Lydia had ever imagined having. It was also exhausting and occasionally terrifying. Every success brought new pressure, new expectations, new people waiting to see if she'd fail. But she kept going, kept building, kept proving that what she'd started wasn't a fluke or a scandal, but a genuine revolution in how women could participate in economic life. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving. The moors turned white with snow, and the estate became an isolated world unto itself. Lydia and Adrian spent long evenings by the fire, planning expansion for the spring, arguing about trade routes and investment strategies, falling into bed exhausted and satisfied. On Christmas Eve, Adrian gave her a gift, a leather-bound ledger with Vale Thornfield Enterprises embossed on the cover. "What's this?" she asked. "Official partnership. Your shipping company and my estate combined into one entity. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority." He flipped it open to show her the legal documents already prepared. "I know you value independence, and you don't need my name or my money to be successful, but I thought maybe we could build something together that's bigger than either of us alone." Lydia stared at the documents, emotion tightening her throat. "You're giving me half of everything you own." "I'm offering partnership with someone I trust completely. There's a difference." She signed without hesitation, and they sealed it with a kiss that turned into more, the ledger forgotten as they celebrated their new venture in a much more immediate way. Spring arrived gradually, the moors bursting into impossible colors. Lydia woke one morning to find Adrian already dressed, standing by the window. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Come see?" She joined him at the window. Outside, tenant families were gathering for the spring festival, celebrating the end of winter, the beginning of planting season. Children ran through the fields. Musicians tuned instruments. Tables were being set up for a feast. "They asked if you'd join them," Adrian said. "The Duchess traditionally opens the festival." Lydia felt panic flutter in her chest. "I don't know how to do that." "You don't have to perform. Just show up. That's all anyone really wants, to know you see them, that you're part of this community." She dressed carefully and walked out with Adrian to where the crowd waited. Faces turned toward her, some friendly, some neutral, all expectant. "I don't have a formal speech prepared," Lydia said, her voice carrying across the field. "I'm still learning what it means to be part of this place, and I'll probably make mistakes. But I want you to know that I see what you've built here. The work you do matters. Your families matter, and I'm honored to be part of this community." It wasn't eloquent or particularly profound, but it was honest, and that seemed to be enough. The crowd applauded, and the festival began. Lydia spent the day among them, eating at their tables, listening to their stories, dancing awkwardly to music she didn't quite know. It was nothing like the formal balls of London, and she loved every minute of it. Late in the afternoon, an older woman approached her. "Your Grace, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "My granddaughter. She's working in your program now, learning accounts. She's the first person in our family to read and write properly." The woman's eyes were wet. "You've given her choices we never had. That means everything." Lydia felt her own eyes sting. "I'm just trying to help." "You're doing more than that. You're changing what's possible for all of us." That night, lying in bed with Adrian's arm around her, Lydia thought about the woman's words. She'd started this journey 2 years ago, driven by survival and spite, determined to prove everyone wrong. Somewhere along the way, it had become about something bigger, about creating opportunities instead of just defending her own, about building instead of just surviving. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian murmured. "How different everything is from what I expected. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over, that I'd never recover from what happened. And now? Now I realize that day wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Everything I've built, everyone I've helped, this life with you, none of it would exist if Thomas had actually shown up to that wedding." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "So you're saying you're grateful he left you at the altar?" "I'm saying I'm grateful I survived it, that I didn't let it destroy me, that I took all that pain and anger and used it to become someone stronger." She turned to face him. "I'm not glad it happened, but I'm proud of who I became because of it." "You should be. You're extraordinary." "We're extraordinary," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." They fell asleep tangled together, and Lydia dreamed of the future instead of the past for the first time in years. Summer brought an invitation that Lydia had been half expecting, half dreading. The London season was starting again, and Lady Ashford was throwing her annual garden party, the same event where Lydia had first met Thomas 3 years ago. "We don't have to go," Adrian said, reading the invitation over breakfast. "Yes, we do." Lydia's voice was firm. "If I avoid it, people will say I'm still wounded, still hiding. I'm done hiding." The party was exactly as Lydia remembered. Excessive flowers, expensive champagne, society's elite mingling and gossiping. But she walked in differently this time. Not as the hopeful young woman looking for romance, but as the Duchess of Thornfield, successful businesswoman, the woman who'd survived scandal and built an empire anyway. Lady Ashford greeted them with a smile that was almost genuine. "Your Grace, Duchess, how wonderful that you could attend." "Thank you for the invitation," Lydia replied with perfect courtesy. As they moved through the party, Lydia noticed the difference. People no longer whispered behind her back. They approached directly, seeking introduction, asking about her business ventures, requesting her opinion on various matters. She'd gone from scandal to authority, and the shift was dizzying. "There's someone I want you to meet," Emma said, appearing at her elbow. She dragged Lydia toward a young woman standing alone by the fountain, looking lost. "This is Miss Caroline Webb. She just moved to London and doesn't know anyone." Lydia recognized the fear in the girl's eyes, the same uncertainty she'd felt years ago, desperate to fit in, afraid of making mistakes. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Lydia said gently. "All these people, all the unspoken rules." Caroline nodded, looking relieved to have someone acknowledge it. "I feel like I'm going to say something wrong, and everyone will laugh." They probably will. They're terrible that way." Lydia smiled. "But here's what they don't tell you. Their opinions matter far less than you think. The only approval you really need is your own." "Easy for you to say. You're a duchess. You belong here." "No, I really don't. And 3 years ago, half these people watched me get abandoned at the altar and treated it like entertainment." She watched Caroline's eyes widen. "So I understand feeling like you don't fit. But fitting in is overrated. Being yourself is much more interesting." She spent the next hour introducing Caroline to people, running interference when conversations got awkward, showing the younger woman that society wasn't insurmountable, just tedious and occasionally cruel. "You were kind to her," Adrian observed later. "I remember what it was like to be terrified and alone at these things. If I can make it easier for someone else, why wouldn't I? Because most people who survive trauma don't turn around and help others. They protect themselves. Maybe I'm tired of just protecting myself. Maybe I want to build something better." As the party wound down, Lydia found herself standing near the same garden path where Thomas had proposed 3 years ago. The memory didn't sting anymore. It was just history, something that had happened to a different version of herself. "Regrets?" Adrian asked, joining her. "None." She took his hand. "Well, maybe one. I wish I could go back and tell that girl standing here 3 years ago, believing in promises and fairy tales, that everything's going to work out. Not the way she expects, but better, stronger, real. She wouldn't believe you." Probably not, but she'd survive anyway, and that's what matters. They walked back through the party together, and Lydia felt the weight of the past finally lift. She'd spent 2 years carrying it like armor, using it to justify her hardness, her refusal to trust. But she didn't need it anymore. She'd proven everything she needed to prove, to society, to herself, to everyone who'd ever doubted her. The real victory wasn't in defeating Thomas or building a successful business, or even in this marriage that had become genuine. The real victory was standing here, whole and unashamed, knowing that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and used it to become extraordinary. 6 months later, Lydia stood in St. Margaret's Church for the third time. But this time, she wasn't a bride. She was here for a different kind of ceremony, the official dedication of the Vale Foundation for Women's Education and Economic Independence. The church was packed again, but the faces were different. Women who'd gone through her training programs, business leaders who'd partnered with her initiatives, families whose daughters now had opportunities that hadn't existed before. The vicar, the same kind man who'd waited with her through 2 very different experiences at this altar, smiled as he blessed the foundation. "This place has seen both tragedy and triumph," he said. "It seems fitting that it should now be the birthplace of something that will change countless lives." Lydia spoke briefly about the foundation's mission, about creating opportunities and teaching skills, about refusing to accept that anyone should be economically dependent or vulnerable. When she finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Emma was crying openly in the front row. Her father looked proud enough to burst. Lady Margaret was smiling that rare, genuine smile that meant Lydia had exceeded even her formidable expectations. And Adrian was watching her with an expression that made her heart clench. Not pity or concern or even pride, exactly, just love. Simple and certain and unshakable. After the ceremony, as people milled around congratulating each other and celebrating, Lydia found herself alone in the church for a moment. She walked slowly up the aisle, letting herself remember. The girl who'd stood here in white silk, waiting for a man who never came. The woman who'd returned 2 years later, hardened by survival, agreeing to marry for strategy instead of love. And now, herself, whole and real and unafraid. "You did it," Emma said softly, appearing beside her. "You took this place that tried to break you and turned it into something powerful." "We did it," Lydia corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Maybe not. But you're the one who refused to stay broken. That was all you." They stood together, sisters who'd survived scandal and fire and society's cruelty, and Lydia felt profound gratitude. Not for the pain, she'd never be grateful for that, but for what she'd built from it. Outside, Adrian was waiting by their carriage. The autumn afternoon was cold but bright, sunlight slanting through the trees. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Home. Lydia thought about what that meant now. Not a place, but a person. A partnership. A life they'd built together from the ashes of separate tragedies. "Actually, I was thinking we could walk, just for a bit." They strolled through the streets of London together, hand in hand, and Lydia saw the city differently now. Not as a hostile battlefield where she had to constantly prove herself, but as a place full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked. "The future. All the women we're going to help through the foundation, the businesses we're going to build, the changes we're going to make." "Ambitious. Always." She smiled. "But I was also thinking about something smaller, more personal." "What's that?" "Maybe it's time to stop defining ourselves by what we survived and start living for what we want to build." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I spent 2 years being the woman who was abandoned at the altar. Then I spent months being the woman who destroyed the men who tried to destroy her. I'm ready to be something else now." "What do you want to be?" "Happy, present, someone who helps people not because I'm proving a point, but because it matters. Someone who loves you without holding part of myself back in case it all falls apart." Adrian pulled her close. "You already are that person. You have been for months. You just needed to give yourself permission to acknowledge it." They stood there on the street corner, 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate pasts, and Lydia felt completely, radiantly certain of her choice. This was what real love looked like. Not the fairy tale promises of her youth, but the daily decision to trust, to build, to choose partnership even when it was difficult. "Let's go home," she said. "I have plans to make." "More business ventures?" "Those too. But I was thinking about the Northumberland estate, about expanding the programs there, maybe creating a permanent school for girls who want to learn business skills." Adrian grinned. "Of course you were. Can't be idle for 5 minutes, can you?" "Idle is boring. I'd rather change the world." "Then let's change it together." They walked home through the fading afternoon light, and Lydia thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, naive and hopeful, believing that love meant promises whispered in gardens and white silk and happy endings. That girl hadn't understood that real love was harder and messier and infinitely more valuable, that it meant showing up every day, choosing partnership over self-protection, building something that could withstand storms because it was founded on honesty instead of illusion. She understood it now. The house came into view, grand and solid, a physical manifestation of everything they'd built. Lydia looked at it and felt not intimidation or unworthiness, but belonging. This was her home, her life, her future, and she'd earned every bit of it, not through perfection or pleasing others, but through surviving, adapting, refusing to let cruelty define her story. She'd taken the day that tried to destroy her and used it as fuel to become extraordinary. She'd transformed a church that witnessed her humiliation into the birthplace of a movement that would change thousands of lives. She'd turned enemies into examples and pain into purpose. Most importantly, she'd learned that real strength wasn't about never being hurt. It was about being broken and rebuilding yourself anyway, piece by careful piece, until you were stronger than before. "I love you," she told Adrian as they reached the door. Not because she had to, not because it was expected, but because it was true, and she was finally brave enough to say it without fear. "I love you too," he replied, "even when you're planning to dismantle the entire social order before breakfast." Especially then. They went inside together, ready for whatever came next, because Lydia had learned the most important lesson of all. She didn't need rescuing or protection or someone else to validate her worth. She just needed to keep showing up, keep building, keep refusing to let anyone else write her story. And with Adrian beside her, challenging her, supporting her, loving her without trying to change her, she was unstoppable. The autumn wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, but Lydia barely noticed. She was already thinking ahead to tomorrow's work, to the next woman who needed help, to the next opportunity to prove that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And what a beginning it had been.